Hello students, this is Mrs. Miller, and the purpose of this video is to solve Perplexor number 2. So I'm going to share my thinking with you as I go through and solve the Perplexor. The first thing I'm going to do is read the story, so please follow along with me as I read the story. Ron, Paul, John, and Mason were 4 champions in the less well-known sport of chess, curling, wrestling, and fencing. Their last names were Wilson, Chambers, Jackson, and Larson, and they were from New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Seattle. Based on the clues, match the champions with their last names, their sports, and the cities they were from. Okay, so before I start, I can see here that this tells me the person's name. This is the sport that they were known for. This is their last name. And this is the city where they're from. Okay? All right, here we go. The curling champion was from Seattle. Well, I can't do anything with that information right now, so I'm just going to put a circle around number 1 so that I remember to come back to that. Number 2 says Larson, who was from New York, was the fencing champion. So I'm going to go and look. Larson was from New York, and he was from New York. Chambers was from Chicago. Again, there's nothing I can do with this information yet, so just like with number 2, I'm just going to circle it so I know to come back to it. Mason Wilson was not the wrestling champion. So Mason, I'm going to go over to Mason, and this is Mason right here. It tells me that his last name is Wilson, so I'm going to go ahead and circle Wilson. I'm going to eliminate all of the others, and it tells me he was not the wrestling champion, so I'm going to go ahead and cross off wrestling for Mason. I'm also going to go ahead and cross off Wilson underneath everybody else. If Mason's last name is Wilson, then nobody else can have the last name of Wilson. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and put an X through number 4 because I'm finished with that clue. I don't need to revisit that one. Let's take a look at number 5. It says, Paul and John were not from Chicago. So I'm going to go over to Paul, and I'm going to strike out Chicago. And I'm going to go to John, and I'm going to strike out Chicago. Now I'm going to go ahead and X through number 5 because I'm finished with that clue. Okay? Let's take a look at number 6. Ron was not the chess champion. So I'm going to go over to Ron, and I'm going to cross off chess because Ron was not the chess champion. And I'm finished with clue 6. I don't need to do anything else with clue 6. Number 7, John was not the fencing champion. So I'm going to go over to John, and I'm going to cross off fencing. And I'm going to cross off clue 7. Number 8 says Mason was not from Seattle. So I'm going to go ahead and strike out Seattle for Mason, and I'm going to put an X. Now, you might be wondering, how am I going to solve this when I've gone through all of the clues and there's still so much information here? So what I do now is I'm going to go back up to number 1, and then I'm going to think through the process. It says the curling champion was from Seattle. Well, I can see right now that Mason was not from Seattle. So I know that he was not the curling champion. And so I'm going to put a strike through for curling. So you see how I'm eliminating some things? I'm still not finished with clue number 1. So I know I'm going to have to come back to that. Okay? Number 2, Larson, who was from New York, was the fencing champion. Well, I can see right now that John wasn't the fencing champion because I've already eliminated fencing from John. So John wasn't the fencing champion, so that means John was not from New York. So I'm going to strike through New York. And John's last name was not Larson, so I'm going to go ahead and strike through Larson. Are you following? Because clue says Larson was from New York and he was the fencing champion. So since I have John here and I've already eliminated fencing, I know that he was not from New York, and he did not have the last name of Larson. Let's take a look at clue number 3. It says Chambers was from Chicago. So I'm going to look to see if Chicago is already eliminated from underneath anybody, and it is. It's eliminated from under Paul. So I know that Paul's last name is not Chambers, so I'm going to strike through Chambers. And I see that Chicago is eliminated right here under John, so John's last name is not Chambers. Now there's something else I can look for. I can see if somebody already has a last name. Mason's last name is Wilson, and so I know that he was not from Chicago. Okay, so I'm going to strike through Chicago. So there we go. I've eliminated some more information. And look, I see now, with this information here, that John's last name is Jackson. So I'm going to go ahead and circle Jackson for John, and I'm going to strike through Jackson for everybody else. And look here by Paul. I see that Paul's last name was Larson. That's the only thing that's left. That's why this process of elimination is so important. So I'm going to circle Larson for Paul. This also allows me to eliminate Larson from underneath Ron. And I see now that Ron's last name is Chambers. That's the only option left. So his last name is Chambers. Now let's take a look at that clue number 3 again. Clue number 3 says Chambers was from Chicago. So I see here that Ron's last name is Chambers, and so I know that he's from Chicago. So I'm going to go ahead and circle Chicago, and I'm going to put a strike through all of the others. Now once again, I'm going to go back and reread. Clue number 1 says the curling champion was from Seattle. Well, I can look and see if if I've already eliminated Seattle from anybody, and I have. I've eliminated Seattle from underneath Ron, so I know that Ron was not the curling champion, so I'm going to eliminate curling from under Ron. Let's revisit clue number 2. Larson, who was from New York, was the fencing champion. Well, I can see that Larson is the last name of Paul, and so I now know that he was from New York, and he was the fencing champion. Okay. I am now finished with clue number 2. I'm finished with clue 2, so I'm going to X through that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and eliminate chess, curling, and wrestling from under Paul. But I'm also going to eliminate Pittsburgh and Seattle from under Paul. Since I circled fencing right here, I'm going to eliminate fencing from underneath everybody else. That way I know that it's already been used. Okay? Now, I'm seeing some other things opening up here. The only thing left for Ron is wrestling. So I'm going to go ahead and circle that. I'm going to go ahead and circle that for Ron. Ron's sport was wrestling. Okay? I now can eliminate wrestling from underneath John. I can also see the only thing left for Mason is chess, so I'm going to go ahead and circle chess under Mason and eliminate chess from under John, and that leaves curling for John. This is why the process of elimination is so very important. Once you use something up, you need to cross it off so that you can see what is still left. Okay? Now I see that I still have a few things down here that I need to figure out. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up and I'm going to read clue number 1. It says, the curling champion was from Seattle. Well, I see that John was the curling champion, and now, that clue makes sense to me. He was from Seattle. So I'm going to circle Seattle and eliminate Pittsburgh. I now can, I see that I've already eliminated Seattle from underneath everybody else. I also see that I had circled New York for underneath Paul, but I didn't go through and eliminate that from underneath Mason. So I need to go back and do that. And that leaves one thing for Mason, and that is Pittsburgh. And so there you go, my friends. This is how you solve Perplexor number 2.